Step out of the vehicle, now." Brigadier General Elijah Monroe kept both hands on the wheel, calm and composed. The red and blue strobes behind him lit up the interior of his sleek black sedan in anxious flashes. He was in full dress uniform, his nameplate clearly visible, Monroe. But to Officer Kyle Denton, none of that mattered. All he saw was a black man driving through an affluent neighborhood in an expensive car. Denton's hand hovered over his holster as he shouted orders. Elijah tried to speak, but the officer cut him off, barking accusations, ignoring every word. In under a minute, Monroe was yanked from the vehicle, slammed chest first onto the hood, and cuffed like a criminal. No questions, no explanation. No acknowledgement of the stars pinned to his shoulders, or the military credentials he'd tried to present. Neighbors peeked through curtains, a jogger stopped mid-stride to record. Somewhere nearby, a child asked her mother, "Why are they arresting a soldier?" Still, Denton muttered under his breath, calling Elijah just another thug in a stolen ride. But what Officer Denton didn't know was that Brigadier General Elijah Monroe wasn't just any soldier. He was a combat-tested, highly decorated officer with over 32 years of service, a graduate of the Naval Academy, a national security advisor to the Pentagon. But none of that stopped a biased officer from assuming guilt based solely on skin color. Monroe didn't resist, he didn't argue. He calmly asked one question. "May I make a phone call?" Denton smirked. "Yeah, sure, call your parole officer." Elijah dialed a number that only a handful in the country even had access to. It rang once. "Yes, General," a voice answered. "I've been detained," Elijah said, requesting immediate support. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted. 2 unmarked black SUVs rolled up. Men in tailored suits stepped out. One flashed a Department of Defense badge, the other leaned close to Officer Denton and whispered something that made the officer's face go pale. The handcuffs came off instantly. "Sir, I didn't realize," Denton stammered. "No," Monroe replied, brushing off his jacket. "You didn't care to realize." The Pentagon officials escorted him back to his car with care. As they pulled away, Denton stood frozen, watching the man he had humiliated drive off with quiet dignity and an entire country about to see what had happened. By morning, millions had watched it. News anchors, veterans, lawmakers, and celebrities voiced outrage, not just over the insult to a military hero, but how quickly one man's identity was stripped away by a single assumption. Later that week, General Monroe appeared on national television, not to shame Officer Denton, but to expose a deeper truth. "I've commanded troops in active war zones," he said, "but the most dangerous moment I've ever experienced was standing unarmed on a sidewalk in my own country with my hands raised." It wasn't the first time. Monroe shared other moments, stores where he'd been followed, boardrooms where people assumed he was security, and suburban streets where neighbors clutched their purses tighter when he passed in uniform. These weren't isolated. They were patterns. Patterns that proved to some, skin color still speaks louder than honor or achievement. Denton was suspended, then fired, and eventually charged with misconduct and unlawful arrest. The city issued a public apology, but the damage had already been done. Elijah, however, didn't stop there. He turned personal pain into national reform, launching a program for modernizing traffic stop protocols and mandatory bias training for law enforcement. He spoke at academies across the country, his voice never rising, his composure never wavering. He didn't seek revenge, he demanded accountability, and people listened. Departments began retraining veteran officers. New cadets learned from Monroe's story. Racial bias was no longer buried under bureaucracy, it was faced head-on. Because when a high-ranking military general in uniform can be mistaken for a threat, something in the system is deeply broken. And when that general chooses to respond not with fury, but with grace, something greater begins to heal. Brigadier General Elijah Monroe reminded the world that real strength isn't in how loud you yell, but how powerfully you act when silence would be easier. That dignity doesn't demand attention, it commands it. He stood tall when others knelt to prejudice, and in doing so, he lifted a nation to its feet. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comma in the comments below. Because sometimes it only takes one man's quiet courage to shift the course of justice.